The Biltmore Grand Hotel rose like a limestone giant against the Los Angeles night, its Art Deco crown catching the amber glow of street lamps far below. October in 1937 brought warm Santa Ana winds that whistled through the city's growing skeleton of steel and concrete, carrying with them the scent of orange groves from the valleys beyond, those few that hadn't yet been sacrificed to progress. Our man stood at his post in the lobby, brass buttons gleaming on his burgundy uniform, watching the last of the evening crowd disperse. The elevator operator, as the hotel register would list him, though he thought of himself simply as a man who knew his machine. 34 years breathing, 14 in America, 6 in this very spot, running the main elevator from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. The graveyard shift, they called it, though he found more life in these quiet hours than in all the daylight bustle. His hands, calloused from years before the hotel, railroad work in Chicago, factory floors in Detroit, now moved with the practiced grace of a pianist across the brass controls. The Otis elevator, installed in 1923 when the hotel first opened its doors, responded to his touch like a well-trained horse. He knew every cable's tension, every gear's particular song, the way the counterweight shifted depending on the number of passengers. This knowledge lived in his bones, not in any manual. "Evening, friend," Harold Pemberton's voice cut through his observations. The head doorman moved with that particular rolling gait that favored his left leg, shrapnel from Bellow Wood he'd mentioned once, though never elaborated. Pemberton had been here since the beginning, they said, part of the hotel's foundation as surely as its marble columns. "Quiet night ahead, I expect." The elevator operator nodded, watching Pemberton's reflection in the polished brass doors. The older man's uniform hung perfectly pressed despite the late hour, silver hair combed back with pomade that caught the light. There was something in the way Pemberton surveyed the lobby, like a general reviewing troops, that made our man unconsciously straighten his own posture. The hotel itself breathed differently at night. During the day, it thundered with the footsteps of oil executives, movie producers, and their various entourages. But now, in these small hours, it revealed its true character. The soft tick of the lobby clock, the distant hum of the ice machine on the third floor, the settling sighs of a building digesting the day's activities. Through the massive windows, the city spread its contradictions. 2 blocks south, Skid Row festered with the displaced souls of the Dust Bowl, men who'd lost farms to drought and banks in equal measure. Yet here, in this marble sanctuary, a single night's stay cost more than those men saw in a month. Our operator understood both worlds. His boarding house on Spring Street sat precisely between them, neither here nor there. The telephone switchboard glowed in its alcove, and behind it, Margaret Chen worked her own kind of magic, connecting voices across the city. Maggie, as she'd asked him to call her during their brief exchanges, possessed a quality rare in this place. She looked at him when she spoke, not through him like the guests did. Her fingers danced across the plugs and cords with a speed that impressed him, reminding him of his own relationship with his machine. "You should practice the phrase I taught you," she called over during a lull, her voice carrying that particular San Francisco lilt that distinguished her from the Los Angeles natives. "The one about the weather." He attempted it, his Polish accent still thick despite years of trying to sand it down. "The evening is particularly pleasant." The words felt strange in his mouth, formal in a way that his thoughts never were. She smiled, not unkindly. "Better. Remember, particularly has that sneaky R in the middle." This had become their routine. She'd teach him what she called elevator-appropriate phrases during the quiet spells. Things beyond, "Which floor, sir?" and "Watch your step, madam." She had dreams, Maggie did, of voices carrying over radio waves instead of telephone lines. He admired that in her, the way she could imagine herself elsewhere while still being completely present in her work. Mr. Blackwood emerged from his office, the night manager's face bearing its usual expression of barely controlled anxiety. The man had been different before the crash, Pemberton had mentioned once. Used to work in one of those tall buildings on Spring Street, moving paper that represented fortunes. Now he managed the night shift of a hotel, and our operator could smell the gin on him from 6 feet away, hidden beneath too much cologne. "Everything in order?" Blackwood asked, his words carefully pronounced in that way of men trying to prove their sobriety. "Yes, sir. Running smooth as silk." Blackwood nodded, already moving away, his attention scattered across a dozen small concerns. The elevator operator watched him go, noting the slight tremor in the man's hands. Everyone had their burdens in these times, their private calculations of survival. His own included the letter in his pocket from his mother in Chicago, her handwriting growing shaky, speaking of doctors and medicines in that indirect way she had of asking without asking. The elevator called him back, a soft chime indicating someone on the 7th floor. He stepped inside his domain, pulling the brass gate closed with a satisfying clang. The car rose through the building's spine, and he felt that familiar sensation of leaving the ground's certainties behind. Each floor had its own personality at this hour. The 3rd floor, where the traveling salesman stayed, cheaper rooms, but still respectable. The 5th floor of more permanent residents, retired folks living on carefully managed fortunes. The 7th through 9th floors where the truly wealthy nested. The passenger was Mrs. Vivian Sterling, wrapped in a silk robe that probably cost more than he made in 3 months. She entered the car with that careful dignity of the aged wealthy, her perfume, gardenias, he thought, filling the small space. "Lobby, please," she said, though he already knew. She often couldn't sleep, came down to sit in the palm court with a book and warm milk that the night kitchen kept ready for her. As they descended, she studied him with sharp eyes that belied her 67 years. "You take good care of this machine," she observed. "I can tell by how it sounds. Smooth. Some operators jerk it about terribly." "Thank you, ma'am. She responds well to a steady hand." "She?" Mrs. Sterling smiled slightly. "Yes, I suppose machines are like that. They have personalities, if you pay attention." The elevator settled into the lobby with barely a whisper, and he opened the gate for her. She paused before stepping out. "Tell me, do you ever notice anything unusual during your shifts? Sounds or such?" "Just the building settling, ma'am. These October winds make the upper floors creak sometimes." She nodded slowly, but something in her expression suggested she wanted to say more. Then the moment passed, and she glided away toward the palm court, leaving him alone with his machine and the faint scent of gardenias. October 23rd arrived wrapped in unusual fog that crept up from the harbor, turning the city's lights into watercolor smears. The elevator operator had just finished oiling the guide rails, a task he performed religiously every Tuesday at 2 in the morning when the hotel reached its deepest quiet. His hands moved with the unconscious precision of long practice, feeling for any imperfection in the smooth metal tracks that guided his machine's vertical journey. The lobby clock showed 2:30 when Mrs. Sterling returned from the palm court, her book tucked under one arm. She moved differently than earlier, he noticed, something tighter in her shoulders, a searching quality to her gaze as it swept the empty lobby. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, muffling even the occasional automobile that passed on Grand Avenue. "Ninth floor, if you please," she said, entering the car. Her fingers, adorned with rings that caught the soft elevator light, trembled slightly as she adjusted her robe. He eased the control forward, feeling the familiar surge as the cables engaged. They rose past the 3rd floor, past the 5th, and then, between the 7th and 8th floors, something happened that had never happened in his 6 years operating this machine. The elevator stopped. Not the gradual deceleration he commanded, but a stuttering, mechanical halt that made the car sway slightly on its cables. Then came the sound. A child's cry, soft but unmistakable, seemed to emanate from the very walls of the shaft. It wasn't the sharp wail of immediate distress, but something worse, a low, hopeless sobbing that spoke of prolonged sorrow. The sound had a peculiar quality, as if coming from very far away or through water, muffled, yet penetrating. Mrs. Sterling's hand flew to her throat. "Dear God," she whispered. The operator's mind raced through mechanical possibilities. He tried the control. Nothing. The emergency stop hadn't been engaged, yet the car hung suspended in the darkness between floors. His trained ear picked up the normal sounds of the machinery. The counterweight cables held their tension. The motor hummed its usual pitch. But underneath it all, that crying continued, rising and falling like waves against a distant shore. "Stay calm, ma'am," he said, though his own pulse quickened. He reached for the emergency telephone, cranking the handle that would connect them to the night desk. But before Maggie's voice could come through, the crying stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and the elevator lurched back to life. They completed the journey to the 9th floor in silence. As Mrs. Sterling stepped out, she turned back to him, her face pale beneath the powder. "You heard it too, didn't you? I'm not going mad?" "I heard something, ma'am. Probably just the cables needing adjustment. The fog, it changes how sounds carry." But even as he offered this reasonable explanation, he knew it rang hollow. That hadn't been any mechanical sound he'd ever encountered. By the time he returned to the lobby, Pemberton was already there, as if materialized from the shadows. "Trouble with the lift?" the doorman asked, his expression one of concerned efficiency. "Brief stop between 7 and 8, working fine now." Pemberton's eyes sharpened with interest. "Mrs. Sterling all right? Thought I heard the emergency bell." Strange, the operator thought. He hadn't rung any bell. "She's fine, just startled." "These old buildings," Pemberton said, shaking his head slowly. "They develop personalities over time. I served with a fellow from New Orleans, used to say buildings could hold memories, especially when something tragic happened in them." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "Of course, that's just superstition." The doorman moved closer, lowering his voice conspirationally. "Between us, there was an incident here back in 24. A child, a little girl, fell down the elevator shaft when the gates were left open. Terrible thing." Some of the older staff say that's why that particular spot acts up sometimes. The elevator operator felt his skepticism warring with the memory of that sound. "Acts up how?" "Oh, you know how stories grow. People claim to hear things. Management doesn't like us talking about it. Bad for business. But Mrs. Sterling, she's been here long enough to remember the actual event. Probably why she got so shaken." After Pemberton drifted back to his post by the door, the operator found himself examining his machine with new intensity. He opened the maintenance panel, checking each relay and contact. Everything appeared normal, functioned within parameters, yet something nagged at him, a detail his conscious mind hadn't quite grasped. Maggie waved him over during a break in calls. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, then caught herself. "Sorry, poor choice of words. Mrs. Sterling came through absolutely frantic on the house phone, said the elevator stopped." Mechanical hiccup. It happens. But he found himself reluctant to mention the crying to her, as if speaking it aloud would make it more real. "You don't believe that any more than I do," she said, studying his face. "What really happened up there?" Before he could answer, Mr. Blackwood appeared, his gait slightly unsteady. The smell of gin was stronger tonight, barely masked by peppermints. "Pemberton tells me there was an incident. The elevator malfunctioning?" "Minor stop, Mr. Blackwood. Already checked all the systems. Everything's in perfect order." Blackwood's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Can't have mechanical problems. The owners are already looking for excuses to modernize. Put in those automatic elevators. No operators needed, they say. More efficient." He laughed bitterly. "Efficiency. That's all anyone cares about anymore." The rest of the shift passed without incident, but the operator found himself hyper-aware of every sound his machine made. As dawn approached, painting the fog pink through the windows, he made a decision. He would investigate this properly, methodically, the way he'd learned to diagnose any mechanical problem. Eliminate possibilities one by one until only the truth remained. In his pocket, his mother's letter crinkled as he moved, reminding him of responsibilities beyond this marble tower. He'd need to send more money soon. The medicine she didn't quite ask for cost $12 a month, 4 days' wages. These were the mathematics of his life, as precise and unforgiving as any mechanical equation. But now there was this new variable, a sound that shouldn't exist, in a spot where tragedy had once occurred. The rational part of his mind, the part that understood torque and tension and gear ratios, rejected any supernatural explanation. Yet he'd learned that machines could surprise you, could develop quirks and personalities that defied their blueprints. As his shift ended and the day operator arrived, a younger man who treated the elevator like a carnival ride, all jerky starts and sudden stops, our man made one last trip to the 7th floor. He stopped the car at the exact spot where it had halted earlier, killing the motor to listen. Nothing but the building's usual morning sounds, water running through pipes as guests awakened, the distant clatter of breakfast preparation from the kitchen. But there, on the emergency brake cable, his fingers found something that made him pause. Fresh scratches in the metal housing. So slight, he might have missed them if he hadn't been searching. They formed no pattern he could discern, but they were definitely new. In 6 years of maintaining this machine, he'd never seen marks there before. The operator spent his day off in the library on 5th Street, but not among the books. Instead, he sat with the building superintendent's nephew, a young man who worked for Otis Elevator Company and owed him a favor from 2 years back, something about a girl and a misunderstanding, smoothed over with the hotel management. The nephew, Tommy, had brought technical manuals spread across the reading table like maps to hidden treasure. "These scratches you're describing," Tommy said, pointing to a diagram of the emergency brake mechanism. "They could only happen if someone's been manually engaging the safety, but that would require access to the shaft itself." Our man studied the drawings, his mind working through the mechanics. Every elevator had redundant safety systems, Elisha Otis's great innovation that made skyscrapers possible. If the cables snapped, spring-loaded brakes would grip the guide rails. But these could also be triggered manually through the emergency system. The scratches suggested repeated activation, metal grinding against metal in ways it wasn't designed to endure. 3 more incidents had occurred in the week since Mrs. Sterling's encounter, always between 2 and 4 in the morning, always with wealthy guests, always between the 7th and 8th floors. Mr. Harrison, the oil executive from Texas, had emerged from the stopped car white as desert bone, muttering about ungodly sounds. Mrs. Blackstone, visiting from San Francisco, had actually fainted, requiring smelling salts from Pemberton, who'd appeared with remarkable speed. The pattern was too consistent to be mechanical failure. Our operator knew machines. They broke down randomly, not on schedule. They didn't choose their victims based on the size of their bank accounts. That night, he arrived at work early, while the evening operator still had the car. He climbed the service stairs to the 7th floor and examined the shaft through the maintenance access door. The October heat had broken, replaced by unseasonable cold that made the metal framework sweat with condensation. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating cables, counterweights, and the maze of mechanical systems that turned vertical space into usable transportation. There, on the emergency brake cable, just above the 7th floor, not just scratches, but a pattern of wear that suggested something had been attached to it, something that pulled or vibrated the cable in a specific way. He made mental measurements, calculating angles and forces. Whatever was causing the brake to engage, it wasn't happening accidentally. "You're early tonight." Pemberton's voice nearly sent him tumbling backward. The doorman stood in the service corridor, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Checking the systems," the operator replied, closing the access door. "After the incidents this week, thought I should be thorough. Admirable dedication." Pemberton's slight smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I wonder if you're not overthinking things. Old buildings make strange sounds. Add a story about a tragedy, and people's imaginations run wild." They walked back toward the lobby together, Pemberton's uneven gait echoing in the stairwell. "I saw plenty of men in France who heard things that weren't there," the doorman continued. "Shell shock, they called it. The mind playing tricks after trauma. These wealthy folks, they're more fragile than they appear. One strange sound, and they're seeing ghosts." The operator nodded non-committally, but his thoughts raced. Pemberton seemed invested in the supernatural explanation, keen to discourage mechanical investigation. Why? In the lobby, Maggie was dealing with an unusual rush of late-evening calls. Her hands flew across the switchboard, connecting and disconnecting with practiced precision. She caught his eye and mouthed, "Later," indicating she had something to tell him. The night progressed with its usual rhythm, guests returning from the theater, others departing for late suppers at the Coconut Grove or the Brown Derby. He operated his machine with extra attention, feeling for any variation in its behavior. Every sound registered: the whisper of cables through pulleys, the subtle compression of the safety springs, the particular groan of the car passing the 4th floor where the building settled unevenly. At 1:45 in the morning, Maggie finally got her break. She hurried over, excitement brightening her features. "I've been tracking the calls," she whispered, producing a small notebook from her pocket. "Every time there's an incident with the elevator, Mrs. Sterling or one of the other affected guests calls the front desk in a panic." But here's the interesting part. Pemberton always calls the desk first, about 2 minutes before the incident, asking about the guests' locations. The operator's pulse quickened. "You're certain about the timing?" "I log every call. It's required. Look." She showed him her neat handwriting, timestamps aligned like evidence in a court case. He calls, confirms the guest is heading up, then 2 minutes later, the incident occurs. A system, then, deliberate and planned. But to what end? "There's more," Maggie continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I mentioned the crying sound to my aunt. She worked here as a maid in the 20s. She says there was never any child who died in the elevator shaft. That's a complete fabrication. The only death was an elderly man who had a heart attack in the restaurant." The operator felt pieces clicking into place like gears engaging. A false story, strategically placed. Mechanical manipulation disguised as supernatural occurrence. But the centerpiece of it all, the crying itself, remained unexplained. No amount of cable pulling could produce that specific, haunting sound. "I need to get into the shaft properly," he said, more to himself than to Maggie. "Not just peek through the access door, but actually climb down, examine every inch between 7 and 8. She gripped his arm, her concern genuine. "That's dangerous. If Pemberton is involved in something and catches you—" "I know my machine," he replied, with more confidence than he felt. "And machines don't lie. They can be made to do things, but they always leave evidence of the making." Mr. Blackwood stumbled through the lobby at 2:30, his condition worse than usual. The night manager paused at the elevator, swaying slightly. "Any problems tonight?" "Quiet as a church, Mr. Blackwood." "Good, good. Can't have any more incidents. The owners are asking questions. They think I'm not maintaining proper oversight." His laugh was bitter. "As if anyone could oversee the supernatural." After Blackwood retreated to his office, the operator made his decision. At 3:15, during the deadest hour of the night when even the city outside seemed to hold its breath, he would enter the shaft. The evening's last theater crowd had long since returned, and the early morning risers wouldn't stir for another 2 hours. He positioned the car at the 9th floor and engaged the maintenance lock, a procedure that would keep it there even if someone called for it. Then, using the service ladder built into the shaft, he began his descent into the building's vertical heart. The shaft was a different world, a narrow canyon of cables and shadows where the hotel's polished facade gave way to raw function. His flashlight beam picked out details invisible from the car. Grease stains on the guide rails, dust accumulated in corners, the vast counterweight that balanced the elevator car hanging like a suspended boulder. Between the 7th and 8th floors, he found it. The discovery in the shaft changed everything. Yet the operator told no one, not even Maggie. He needed time to understand what he'd found, to trace the mechanism of deception to its source. The object wedged into the counterweight housing was ingenious in its simplicity. An antique doll, perhaps 18 inches tall, with a porcelain head and velvet dress. But this was no ordinary toy. Someone had modified it, installing what appeared to be a small phonograph mechanism in its torso, the kind used in those novelty talking dolls from the last century. 3 nights passed before he could return to examine it properly. During those nights, he watched Pemberton with new eyes, cataloging the doorman's movements, his interactions with the guests. The pattern revealed itself like a photograph developing in solution. After each haunting, the affected guest would seek out Pemberton, not the hotel management. They'd have hushed conversations in the lobby corners, and money would change hands. "For your discretion," he overheard Mrs. Harrison say, pressing bills into Pemberton's palm, "and for your protection." The operator's boarding house room became a workshop of sorts. He'd sketched the doll's mechanism from memory, working out how it functioned. The phonograph inside would be triggered by vibration, specifically the sharp jolt caused by the emergency brake engaging. The crying would play for perhaps 30 seconds, just long enough to terrify, but not so long as to allow investigation. Brilliant, really, in its exploitation of human psychology. His mother's latest letter lay unopened on his small table. He knew what it would say without reading it. The medicine was helping, but the doctor recommended a specialist, perhaps surgery. Numbers that would dwarf his careful savings, eclipse his monthly calculations. He earned $18 a week, good money for elevator work, but not enough for what she needed. The thought flickered unbidden. How much was Pemberton making from his scheme? How many terrified guests had paid for protection from a ghost that didn't exist? He pushed the thought away, disgusted with himself. His mother hadn't raised him to profit from others' fear. On the fourth night after his discovery, Maggie cornered him during her break. "You found something," she said, not a question but a statement. "You've been different, watching Pemberton like a hawk watches a mouse." He wanted to tell her, to share the burden of knowledge, but something held him back. Perhaps it was the way Pemberton had started watching him in return, those keen eyes tracking his movements whenever their shifts overlapped. Or perhaps it was his own uncertainty about what to do with the information. Exposing Pemberton would mean accusations against a war veteran, a man with 20 years of service to the hotel. Who would believe a night shift elevator operator, an immigrant with an accent that still marked him as an outsider? "I'm still gathering information," he said finally. "When I know enough, I'll act." She studied his face with those intelligent eyes. "There's something else. You're afraid, but not of Pemberton. What is it?" How could he explain the war inside himself? The part that wanted justice, that burned with anger at the exploitation of innocent people's fears, against the part that understood desperation, that knew what it meant to need money for someone you loved. "My aunt," Maggie said suddenly. "The one who worked here in the 20s? She told me something else. Pemberton wasn't always like this. He had a family once, a wife and daughter. The daughter died of polio in 32, and the wife followed a year later, grief and exhaustion. The medical bills bankrupted him. He lives in a decent room now, but she says he sends most of his money somewhere. Maybe relatives, maybe debts, she doesn't know. The information settled over him like dust. Everyone had their private calculations, their personal mathematics of survival. It didn't excuse what Pemberton was doing, but it complicated the clean lines of right and wrong he'd been drawing in his mind. Mr. Blackwood appeared at the elevator at 2 in the morning, more sober than usual, but looking haggard. "I need to speak with you," he said, his voice low. "Privately." They rode up to the 9th floor in silence. Blackwood led him to an empty suite, one being renovated, where drop cloths covered furniture like ghosts themselves. "I know you've been investigating the incidents," Blackwood said without preamble. "Don't deny it. I may drink too much, but I'm not blind. You're not the only one who's noticed patterns." The operator remained silent, waiting. "The owners are sending an inspector next week," Blackwood continued. "If there are any more incidents, They'll use it as an excuse to modernize everything. Automatic elevators, reduced staff. We'll all be out of work." He paused, rubbing his face. "I've watched you for 6 years. You're honest, careful. So I'm asking, whatever you've found, can you make it stop without making it public?" Here it was then, the price of peace. Stay quiet, handle it privately, save everyone's jobs. The operator thought of the other night staff, the maids, the porters, the kitchen workers. How many families depended on this place? "I'll do what I can," he said carefully. Back in the lobby, he found Mrs. Sterling waiting by his elevator despite the late hour. She entered the car with her usual dignity, but once the doors closed, her composure cracked slightly. "I know it's not a ghost," she said quietly. "I may be old, but I'm not foolish."
Someone is doing this deliberately.
He kept his eyes forward, maintaining the professional distance expected of him, but he listened. "I've been watching too," she continued. "That doorman, Pemberton, he's always so helpful afterward, isn't he? So understanding. And we're so grateful we give him a little something for his kindness." Her voice turned sharp. "I've lived through the Gilded Age, young man. I know a confidence game when I see one." They reached her floor, but she didn't immediately exit. The question is, what should be done about it? A scandal would hurt the hotel, hurt all the people who work here. But allowing it to continue, she shook her head. "I leave it to your judgment. You strike me as someone who understands the weight of such decisions." Alone again, the operator felt the converging pressures, Blackwood's plea, Mrs. Sterling's challenge, his mother's needs, his own sense of justice.
The doll waited in the shaft like evidence in a crime. But evidence of what, exactly? Human cruelty? Desperate circumstances? The thin line between survival and exploitation? He thought of Pemberton's limp, the shrapnel that would pain him until his last day. The man had given his youth to a war, his middle age to this hotel, and what did he have to show for it? A scheme born of loss and medical bills, targeting people who could afford the loss, but not the fear. The mathematics of it all made his head hurt. How did you balance suffering against suffering, need against honesty? November 15th brought unseasonable rain that drummed against the hotel's windows like nervous fingers. The operator had spent 2 weeks perfecting his plan, studying the shaft's architecture during every spare moment, memorizing every beam, cable, and shadow. Tonight, he would retrieve the doll, not to expose Pemberton immediately, but to understand fully how the mechanism worked, to have proof if needed. He waited until 3:45 in the morning, that peculiar hour when even insomniacs finally surrendered to exhaustion. The lobby sat empty, except for the night porter dozing in his chair by the service entrance. Maggie had gone home early with a headache, leaving the switchboard to the relief operator, who barely looked up from his detective magazine. The operator positioned his car at the 10th floor, engaged the maintenance lock, and entered the shaft through the access panel. The service ladder was slick with condensation from the rain-cooled building. He descended carefully, his flashlight clenched between his teeth, tasting metal and machine oil. The counterweight hung massive and silent in the darkness, its bulk precisely calculated to balance a full elevator car. The doll was wedged behind it in a specially constructed bracket. Someone had put thought into this placement. He reached for it, fingers stretching into the narrow space, when footsteps echoed from above. He killed his flashlight instantly, pressing himself against the shaft wall. The footsteps paused at the 7th floor access door. Metal scraped against metal. a key in a lock. The door opened, and a beam of light swept the shaft. "I know you're in here," Pemberton's voice drifted down, conversational rather than threatening. "Been watching you watch me. Figured tonight would be when you made your move." The operator remained frozen, calculating distances and options. He was trapped between floors, too far from any exit to reach it before Pemberton could act. "Not going to report you," Pemberton continued. "That would raise questions neither of us wants answered. But we need to talk, you and I, man to man." The flashlight beam moved away from his position. "I'm going to the 8th floor landing. Meet me there. And bring the doll. I know that's what you're after." The footsteps retreated. The operator waited a full minute before moving, then carefully extracted the doll from its hiding place. It was heavier than expected, the phonograph mechanism adding substantial weight. Up close, he could see the craftsmanship. This was an expensive toy from perhaps 1900, the kind wealthy children once treasured. The porcelain face was painted with disturbing realism, eyes that seemed to follow him in the flashlight's beam. He climbed to the 8th floor, where Pemberton waited in the service corridor, leaning against the wall. In the harsh overhead light, the doorman looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. "Beautiful piece of work, isn't it?" Pemberton said, nodding at the doll. "Found it in an estate sale 3 years ago. The phonograph was already installed, some Victorian novelty. All I had to do was replace the wax cylinder with one containing the right sounds." The crying. "Recorded it myself at the orphanage on Alameda Street. Volunteered there briefly, reading to the children. Nobody questioned a man with a phonograph. Said I was preserving their songs for posterity." His smile was bitter. "Instead, I preserved their sorrow." The operator set the doll carefully on a crate, its painted eyes staring at nothing. "Why tell me this?" "Because you're going to let me finish what I started." Pemberton pulled out a small notebook showing columns of figures. $23,000 in medical debts. That's what it cost to try to save my daughter, then my wife. The best doctors, experimental treatments, trips to specialists in San Francisco and Chicago, all for nothing. They died anyway, and I was left with bills that would take 3 lifetimes to pay. The numbers were staggering. The operator thought of his mother's modest medical needs and multiplied them by 100. "I've collected 8,000 so far," Pemberton continued. "These wealthy guests, they throw away more on a weekend than most people see in a year. What's $100 to them for peace of mind? For protection from a ghost?" He laughed, short and sharp. "They're so eager to believe in the supernatural, it absolves them from looking at the natural suffering right in front of them. You're stealing through fear. I'm surviving through theater." Pemberton's voice hardened. "You think these people earned their wealth honestly? Half of them profited from the crash, buying up foreclosed farms and failed businesses. They stay here in their marble tower while families live in cardboard boxes 2 streets over." The operator couldn't deny the truth in that, but it didn't make the deception right. "Blackwood knows something's wrong. There's an inspector coming." "Then I need to accelerate my timeline." Pemberton straightened, his hand moving to his coat pocket, not threatening, but making clear he was armed. 3 more weeks, that's all I need. 3 more incidents, 3 more payoffs, and I'll have enough to satisfy the creditors and disappear. You can have your clean elevator back, your honest work. And if I refuse, then we both lose.
I'll be exposed, yes, but so will you, the immigrant elevator operator who knew about the scheme and said nothing, who's been sneaking around the shaft at night, tampering with hotel property. Which story do you think management will prefer to believe? The rain intensified, drumming against the windows at the end of the corridor. The operator studied the doll, its mechanism visible through a crack in its dress. Such an elaborate deception for such desperate reasons. "The crying," he said finally. "How do you trigger it at exactly the right moment?" Pemberton actually smiled, perhaps relieved to talk technicalities rather than morality. "The emergency brake cable runs through a pulley on 7. I attached a wire to it, thin as fishing line, nearly invisible. Runs down to the janitor's closet on the 6th floor. Quick pull, the brake engages just enough to stop the car and trigger the doll's mechanism. The vibration does the rest." Ingenious and terrible. The operator picked up the doll, feeling its weight. "Show me," he said. They descended to the 6th floor, where Pemberton demonstrated the setup. It was almost admirable in its simplicity: a few feet of piano wire, a modified pulley, and precise timing. The kind of innovation born from desperation and mechanical knowledge. "You are an engineer," the operator said, recognizing the hallmarks of formal training. "Before the war. Built bridges once, things meant to connect rather than deceive." Pemberton's fingers traced the wire. Funny how skills translate. Footsteps echoed from below, someone entering the stairwell. Both men froze. The steps were uneven, stumbling. Blackwood's voice drifted up, singing off-key about Irish eyes. The night manager was making his drunken rounds. They waited in tense silence until the footsteps faded. Then, Pemberton carefully returned the doll to its hiding place, the operator noting every detail of the installation. 3 weeks, Pemberton repeated. Then it's over. The doll disappears, the ghost is laid to rest, and everyone moves on. The operator thought of Mrs. Sterling's sharp eyes, Maggie's careful documentation, Blackwood's desperate plea to keep the peace. 3 weeks of continued deception, or immediate revelation that would destroy multiple lives. "I need time to consider. You have until tomorrow night. After that, I assume you're either with me or against me." Pemberton moved toward the stairs, then paused. "You know, we're not so different. We both serve these people, smile at their demands, pretend their world is ours. The only difference is I decided to charge them for the performance." The downtown library's newspaper archive occupied the basement, where November rain leaked through old pipes and created archipelagos of buckets across the floor. The operator spent his day off reading through yellowed copies of the Los Angeles Times from 1924, searching for any mention of a child's death at the Biltmore Grand. Maggie had offered to accompany him, but he'd declined. This investigation felt too personal now, tangled with his own complicity. What he found wasn't what he expected. No elevator accident, no tragic fall, but something else entirely. A Society page photograph from December 19, 1924. "Christmas Charity Gala at the Biltmore Grand," the caption read. And there in the background stood a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, holding an elaborate doll, the same doll now hidden in the elevator shaft. The child was identified as Dorothy Whitmore, daughter of railroad magnate Harrison Whitmore. The article mentioned she'd donated her favorite doll to be auctioned for charity, raising $200 for the Children's Hospital. A touching gesture from a wealthy child.
But the operator recognized something in her expression, captured accidentally by the photographer, the forced smile of a child made to perform generosity. He traced the story forward through the newspaper indices. Dorothy Whitmore appeared regularly in the society pages until 1932, when the mentions stopped. Not dead, just disappeared from public view. He found the explanation in a small item from August that year. The Whitmore fortune lost in bank failures, the family relocating to pursue opportunities in the East. Code for bankruptcy and shame. The doll then had its own story of loss. A rich child's treasure become a charity auction item, somehow ending up in an estate sale where Pemberton found it. Layers of deception built on genuine sorrow. Returning to the hotel for his shift, he encountered Mrs. Sterling in the lobby, earlier than her usual insomnia-driven wanderings. She beckoned him over with one gloved finger. "I've done my own research," she said quietly. "Harold Pemberton's medical debts, they're real, but not what he claims. His daughter died in 1931, not 32. The bills were settled by the Benevolent Society of the hotel staff. They took up a collection, paid everything." The operator felt the ground shift beneath him. "You're certain?" "I contributed $50 myself. We all did what we could." Her eyes were hard as agate. "Whatever debts he's paying now, they're not medical. I suspect gambling, but that's speculation." The mathematics changed again. Not a desperate father, but a calculating liar. Or perhaps both. The human heart had room for multiple truths. That night, Pemberton appeared at his usual time, moving through the lobby with practiced authority. He nodded to the operator, a silent question in the gesture. The operator gave no response, keeping his attention on his brass controls. At 2 in the morning, another incident occurred. Mr. Goldman from Chicago, a grain merchant with soft hands and hard eyes, experienced the crying elevator. The operator played his part, stopping the car between 7 and 8 when he felt the subtle pull on the emergency brake, listening to the doll's recorded sorrow echo through the shaft, maintaining his professional composure as Goldman went pale with fear. Pemberton appeared with his usual promptness, all soothing words and steady presence. The operator watched the performance with new understanding, the doorman's slight emphasis on certain words, the way he guided Goldman toward the idea of protection without explicitly stating it. A masterclass in manipulation. "These old buildings," Pemberton was saying, "they need someone who understands their moods. I've been here 20 years, learned how to calm things down, you might say." Goldman's hands shook as he pulled out his wallet. "Whatever you think is appropriate for your expertise." After Goldman departed, clutching a glass of brandy Pemberton had procured from the night bar, the doorman approached the elevator. "You're still deciding," he said, not a question. "I'm still learning," the operator replied. Pemberton's smile was thin. "Careful. Too much learning can be dangerous in a place like this." Mr. Blackwood emerged from his office, swaying slightly. The night manager had progressed from gin to whiskey. The operator could tell by the sharper scent. "Another incident," Blackwood said heavily. "The inspector comes Monday. 3 days." He looked between them, his bloodshot eyes struggling to focus. "Whatever's happening, it needs to stop." After Blackwood retreated, Pemberton leaned against the elevator door frame. "You see the position we're all in."
Blackwood needs his job to afford his liquid comfort. You need yours for whatever family obligation keeps you counting pennies. I need mine to survive. We're all trapped in this marble cage, performing for people who see us as furniture." "The Benevolent Society," the operator said quietly. "They paid your medical debts." Pemberton's face went very still. "Mrs. Sterling's been talking." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Yes, they paid the hospital bills. But they couldn't pay for the years I spent watching my girl waste away, or the nights my wife cried herself to death. They couldn't pay for the piece of my soul that died with them." "So you gambled?" "I invested. In sure things that turned out not to be. In promises that evaporated like morning dew." His laugh was bitter. "You know what the real joke is? I'm good at this. The deception, the performance. Better than I ever was at honest work. Maybe this is my true calling." Maggie appeared at her switchboard, early for someone who'd left sick the night before. She caught the operator's eye, her expression urgent. He excused himself and went to her station. "I found something," she whispered, producing a carbon copy of a hotel invoice. "Pemberton ordered the doll from an estate sale, yes, but he had it delivered here to the hotel. The invoice is in the hotel's files. He claimed it was for atmospheric decoration for a Halloween event in '34. The hotel paid for it." Another layer of the scheme, using the hotel's own money to fund the deception against its guests. The operator thought of those Russian dolls, each opening to reveal another inside, smaller but identical in form. "There's more," Maggie continued. "My friend at the radio station, she's interested in the story, says it could be a whole program, Mysteries of Los Angeles or something. She wants to meet you." The weight of decision pressed down. Exposure would mean fame of a sort, perhaps opportunity. It would also mean destruction, Pemberton's, Blackwood's, possibly his own. The hotel would suffer, staff would be dismissed, and the elaborate ecosystem of service and servitude would collapse. "Not yet," he said. "After Monday. After the inspector." She searched his face. "You're protecting him. Why?" How could he explain that he'd seen himself in Pemberton's desperate mathematics, that the line between survival and exploitation was thinner than the piano wire controlling the emergency brake, that in this city of dreams and facades, everyone was performing some kind of deception? "Because the story isn't finished," he said finally. November 28th arrived wrapped in unusual warmth, the kind of late autumn day that made Los Angeles feel like a dream, refusing to acknowledge winter. The operator had spent the previous week in careful preparation, orchestrating movements like a conductor arranging musicians. Mrs. Sterling had proven an eager conspirator once he'd revealed the full scope of the situation, not the complete truth, but enough to secure her cooperation. "I've lived through enough real tragedies to despise manufactured ones," she'd said when he explained his plan. "Though I must admit, the doorman shows considerable ingenuity." They met in the Palm Court at 4 in the afternoon before his shift. She'd ordered tea for two, presenting them as employer and employee discussing elevator maintenance, a cover story that satisfied any watching eyes. The operator explained the mechanism in detail, drawing diagrams on a napkin that she studied with the intensity of a general reviewing battle plans. "So when I feel the elevator stop," she said, "I should count to 5 before beginning my performance." "Yes, ma'am. The crying will last approximately 30 seconds. That gives you time to build to appropriate distress." Her smile was sharp as cut crystal. "Oh, I played Ophelia in my youth. I think I can manage distress." The plan required precise timing. Mrs. Sterling would request the elevator at 2:45 in the morning, insisting she needed to retrieve something from the hotel safe in the basement. The operator would signal Maggie, who would document everything from her switchboard position. Most importantly, they'd arranged for an unexpected witness, Mr. Davidson, the insurance adjuster who'd been investigating a separate claim about water damage on the third floor. The operator had mentioned quite casually that strange things happened in the hotel around 3 in the morning, particularly near the elevator.
Davidson, a man who prided himself on rational explanations, had decided to observe for himself. That evening, Pemberton seemed unusually agitated. He paced the lobby, his limp more pronounced, checking his pocket watch repeatedly. The inspector's visit loomed just 2 days away, and the pressure showed in the deep lines around his mouth. "You've been quiet lately," he said to the operator during a lull. "Makes a man nervous." "Just doing my job, Mr. Pemberton. That's what worries me." The doorman's hand drifted to his coat pocket. A habitual gesture the operator had learned indicated anxiety rather than threat. "Jobs can be interpreted different ways." Mr. Blackwood appeared at midnight, more sober than he'd been in weeks. The pending inspection had frightened him into temporary temperance. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice steady, but his hands trembling slightly from withdrawal, "I want to be absolutely clear. If anything unusual happens before the inspector arrives, I will hold you both personally responsible." After he left, Pemberton laughed softly. "He thinks authority comes from titles. But you and I know better, don't we? Real authority comes from knowing secrets." The operator thought of all the secrets he'd accumulated, Pemberton's debts and deceptions, Blackwood's alcoholism, Mrs. Sterling's sharp awareness behind her facade of aged fragility, Maggie's ambitions that reached far beyond the switchboard. The hotel was built on secrets, each one a supporting beam in an invisible architecture. At 1:30 he made his preparations. He checked the emergency brake cable on the 7th floor, noting fresh scratches where Pemberton had recently attached his piano wire. The doll waited in its hiding place, porcelain face serene in the darkness. He wound the phonograph mechanism carefully, ensuring it would perform when triggered. Maggie took her position at 2:15. Relief operator dismissed with a story about needed repairs to the switchboard. She gave him a thumbs up. Davidson was in place, concealed in the 7th floor linen closet with a clear view of the hallway and elevator doors. At 2:43, Mrs. Sterling appeared in the lobby wearing an elegant dressing gown and an expression of determined purpose. "I simply must retrieve my mother's necklace from the safe," she announced, loud enough for Pemberton to hear from his position by the door. "I can't sleep without knowing it's secure." The operator opened the elevator gates with professional smoothness. "Of course, ma'am. Basement level?" She entered the car with regal bearing, every inch the wealthy widow. As the gates closed, he caught Pemberton's eye. The doorman was already moving toward the service stairs, no doubt heading for his position on the 6th floor. They rose past the 3rd floor, the 5th, approaching the 7th. The operator felt, rather than saw, the subtle tension in the emergency brake cable. He began counting. 3, 2, 1. The elevator lurched to a stop, that familiar, sickening halt between floors.
Right on cue, the crying began, that hopeless, distant sound of a child's sorrow echoing through the shaft. Mrs. Sterling waited exactly 5 seconds, then began her performance. "Oh, God, not again!" Her voice pitched perfectly between fear and indignation. "This is intolerable! Driver, what is that sound?" He played his part, working the controls with apparent frustration. "I don't know, ma'am. The mechanism seems to have engaged on its own." The crying continued, rising and falling in waves. Mrs. Sterling pressed herself against the car's back wall, her breathing quickened to suggest real panic. "Get me out of here! Get me out this instant!" Footsteps pounded up the stairs, Pemberton arriving with his practiced timing. "Mrs. Sterling, are you all right?" I heard the commotion. "Harold, thank God!" Her relief sounded genuine. "It's happening again. That terrible crying." "Stay calm, ma'am. I know how to handle this." Through the gate, the operator saw Pemberton reach for something in the shadows, no doubt the piano wire that would release the emergency brake. But as his hand moved, another figure stepped into view. Davidson, the insurance adjuster, emerged from the linen closet with the satisfied expression of a man solving a puzzle. "I think you'd better explain what you're doing, Mr. Pemberton." The doorman froze, his face cycling through emotions, surprise, fear, and finally a kind of resigned acceptance. The crying continued for another few seconds, then stopped, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the building itself. "It's not what it seems," Pemberton began, but Davidson was already examining the piano wire, following its path to the emergency brake cable. "Oh, I think it's exactly what it seems," Davidson said. He was a small man with the persistent manner of a terrier, and he'd clearly found a bone worth chewing. "Fraud, extortion, conspiracy to deceive. The insurance implications alone." "Please." Pemberton's voice cracked, all authority draining away. "Let me explain." The elevator shuddered back to life. The operator had manually released the emergency brake from inside. He brought the car level with the 7th floor and opened the gates. Mrs. Sterling emerged with dignity intact, her performance abandoned for genuine interest in the unfolding drama. "I believe," she said coolly, "we should discuss this somewhere more private. Mr. Davidson, would you be so kind as to summon Mr. Blackwood? Tell him it concerns the integrity of hotel operations." The oak-paneled conference room on the 2nd floor had witnessed countless negotiations, but never quite like this one. December 3rd, 5 in the morning, the city still dark beyond the windows. Mr. Blackwood sat at the head of the table, stone sober and looking older for it. Mrs. Sterling occupied the chair to his right, with imperial composure. Davidson had his notebook open, pen poised like a weapon. Pemberton stood near the door, no longer the authoritative doorman, but a man diminished, his uniform suddenly too large for his frame. The operator remained standing by the window, watching the street below where early delivery trucks began their rounds. He'd retrieved the doll from the shaft, and it now sat on the table, an accusation in porcelain and velvet. The phonograph mechanism was exposed, its brass workings gleaming in the lamplight. 23 incidents over 14 months, Davidson read from his notes. Estimated extortion total of $8,600. This is criminal fraud, Mr. Pemberton. It was survival, Pemberton said quietly. His hands, the operator noticed, trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the release of long-held tension. Do you know what it's like, Mr. Davidson, to watch everything you've built crumble? To have debts that multiply faster than you can pay them? Your gambling debts, Mrs. Sterling interjected, her voice sharp as winter air. Not medical bills for your family. I verified that myself. Pemberton's laugh was bitter. Gambling, yes. After they died, I thought I could win enough to... To what? Buy them back? Purchase meaning for their loss? He slumped into a chair. The house always wins. I learned that too late. The operator studied the doll's face, painted in an expression of eternal childhood sweetness. Where did you learn about the phonograph mechanism? My daughter had one similar, years ago, a gift from her grandmother. When I saw this one at the estate sale, I recognized the mechanism immediately. Pemberton's fingers traced the air, remembering. The crying. I recorded that at St. Mary's Orphanage. Told them I was preserving the children's voices for a historical project. They trusted me. His voice dropped. Everyone trusted me. Blackwood cleared his throat. The question now is what we do about this. The inspector arrives tomorrow. Today, actually. If this becomes public, the hotel's reputation will be destroyed. We'll all be looking for work. More importantly, Davidson said, there's the matter of restitution. The victims should have their money returned. I don't have it. Pemberton's admission hung in the air like smoke. Most went to creditors. The rest, more foolish bets trying to win back what I'd lost. Mrs. Sterling stood, moving to examine the doll more closely. Mr. Blackwood, what would it cost the hotel if this story became public? Catastrophic losses. We're already struggling with occupancy since the crash. A scandal involving supernatural fraud? We'd be finished within 6 months. She picked up the doll, cradling it with unexpected gentleness. Then I propose a different solution. Mr.
Pemberton will resign immediately, citing health concerns. The hotel will quietly reimburse the victims from its insurance fund, listed as compensation for mechanical failures. Mr. Davidson will note in his report that the elevator incidents were caused by a maintenance issue now resolved. That's covering up a crime, Davidson protested. That's preventing dozens of innocent people from losing their livelihoods, she countered. The chambermaids, the kitchen staff, the porters, should they suffer for one man's desperation? The operator watched Pemberton's face crumble with each word. The man had built his identity around being essential, irreplaceable. Now he was being erased as efficiently as chalk from a board. There's one condition, Mrs. Sterling continued. Mr. Pemberton will accept a position I'll arrange at a sanitarium in Pasadena. Room, board, and honest work. The wages will be garnished to repay what he's taken, even if it takes 20 years. Why? Pemberton looked up at her, genuine confusion in his eyes. Why would you help me? Because I've lived long enough to know that punishment without possibility of redemption helps no one. She set the doll down carefully. And because I remember a young doorman who carried my bags in the rain 20 years ago, who noticed I was crying and never mentioned it to anyone. People aren't just their worst moments, Mr. Pemberton. Maggie appeared in the doorway, having monitored everything from her switchboard. Mr. Blackwood, the morning shift is arriving. Should I adjust any records? Blackwood nodded slowly. Remove any mention of supernatural incidents from the logs. List them as mechanical failures, resolved. He turned to Pemberton. You have 1 hour to clear out your things. I'll prepare a recommendation letter stating you've served honorably for 20 years, leaving for health reasons. Pemberton stood slowly, his dignity attempting to reassemble itself. The doll, what happens to it? The operator spoke for the first time in the meeting. It should be returned to its original owner, if possible.
Dorothy Whitmore. She donated it in 1924. She might want it back. She lives in Pasadena now, Mrs. Sterling said quietly. Married name Parker. Works as a seamstress. I could arrange its return. The group dispersed as dawn light began creeping across the floor. The operator found himself alone with Pemberton in the hallway. The older man extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the operator shook it. "You could have exposed me weeks ago," Pemberton said. "Why didn't you?" The operator thought of his mother's letter, still unopened in his pocket, of the calculations everyone made to survive, of the thin walls between desperation and deception. "Because I understood the mathematics," he said simply. Pemberton nodded slowly, then walked away, his limp more pronounced in defeat. The operator returned to his elevator, running his hands over the familiar brass controls. The machine hummed its usual song, honest and mechanical, without mystery or deception. Davidson stopped by on his way out. "You orchestrated all of this, didn't you? The trap, Mrs. Sterling's involvement, even my presence." "I just operate the elevator, Mr. Davidson." The insurance man smiled thinly. "Yes, and Pemberton was just a doorman." He tipped his hat. "Some things are better left in the shadows between floors, I suppose." As the morning shift arrived, the operator prepared to leave. The hotel was already forgetting the night's drama, absorbing it into its history like all the other secrets embedded in its marble and brass. He thought about the doll, about young Dorothy Whitmore forced to give up her treasure for charity, now grown and working with her hands like him. Perhaps she'd want it back, or perhaps she'd prefer to leave that part of her past buried. The elevator sat silent and patient, waiting for its next operator. No more crying would echo through its shaft, no more manufactured terror. It would return to what it had always been, a machine that lifted people up and brought them down, democratic in its function, if not in its service. The inspector arrived on December 3rd at precisely 9 in the morning, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better decades, and wearing a suit that suggested government pay scales. The operator, having worked through the dawn to ensure his machine's perfection, watched from the lobby as Mr. Blackwood greeted the man with newly sober efficiency. Strange how quickly the hotel adapted to Pemberton's absence. The new doorman, Rodriguez, younger and eager to please, had already learned the guests' names and preferences. Life in the Biltmore Grand continued its choreographed dance, each employee stepping into their prescribed movements without missing a beat. Only the operator noticed the small adjustments. How the night porter now checked the elevator shaft doors himself. How Blackwood avoided the 7th floor entirely. Mrs. Sterling had been true to her word. The victims received discreet letters about compensation for recent mechanical inconveniences, accompanied by checks that matched their payments to Pemberton. Most accepted without question, perhaps preferring the fiction of mechanical failure to the embarrassment of having believed in ghosts. 3 days after the revelation, the operator received an unexpected visitor during his shift. Dorothy Whitmore, now Dorothy Parker, arrived at 11:30 at night, carrying a worn carpet bag and wearing a practical wool dress that spoke of careful mending. She was 37 years old, though the years had carved themselves deeply into her face. "I understand you have something that belonged to me," she said, her voice carrying traces of the upper-class accent she'd been born to, softened by years of different company. He retrieved the doll from the storage room where it had been kept pending her decision. She took it carefully,
her fingers trembling slightly as they touched the porcelain face. "I hated this thing," she said quietly, settling into one of the lobby chairs. The night was quiet enough that he could leave his post briefly. "My mother bought it to show off, made me carry it everywhere like a prop in her social performance. When they made me donate it for charity, I was secretly glad." "But you came to retrieve it?" She smiled, an expression that transformed her careworn face. "Because now I understand what it represented. Not love, but expectation. Not childhood, but the theft of childhood. I need to hold it again to prove I survived it." They sat in comfortable silence, the marble lobby echoing with distant sounds, water running through pipes, the building's bones settling for the night. Then she asked, "The man who used it for his scheme, what happened to him?" "He's working at a sanitarium in Pasadena. Honest work, they say." "Good. Prison would have destroyed him, and he's already destroyed enough." She stood cradling the doll. "I'm going to give this to my daughter. She's 7, the same age I was in that photograph. But I'll give it with love, not obligation." Maybe that will redeem it. After she left, the operator returned to his position, thinking about redemption and cycles, about how objects carry the weight of their histories. The elevator called him, a late arrival needing transport to the 8th floor. As he operated the controls, he felt the subtle difference in the machine's response. Without the piano wire's interference, without the threat of unexpected stops, it ran smoother than it had in months. Maggie's last night arrived on December 15th. She'd gotten the radio job, assistant producer for a new program about city life. The operator had helped her practice her pitch, listening to her describe how voices could paint pictures, create worlds from sound alone. "You could do something more, too," she said during her final break. "You're wasted here, running this elevator up and down. You understand people, machinery, how things really work." He thought about it, this possibility of elsewhere. But then he remembered his mother's latest letter. The treatment was working. She was improving. His steady wages had made that possible. "This is enough," he said, meaning it. "Is it, though?" She studied his face with those intelligent eyes. "Or is it just safe?" Before he could answer, Blackwood appeared, actually smiling, a sight rare as snow in Los Angeles. "Good news," he announced. "The inspector's report came back exemplary. The owners are so pleased, they're approving raises for the night staff, 10% across the board." The mathematics shifted again. 10% more meant better medicine for his mother, perhaps even a visit to Chicago in the spring. Maggie squeezed his hand in congratulation, understanding what this meant without his having to explain. Her final shift ended at dawn. They stood in the lobby as the city awakened beyond the windows, neither quite ready for goodbye. "I'll be on the air Tuesday nights," she said, 9 o'clock. Voices of Los Angeles, we're calling it. Stories about real people in the city. She paused. "I might tell this story someday, when enough time has passed. The crying elevator that wasn't really haunted. Change the details," he said. "Make it fiction." "Everything's fiction from a certain angle." She kissed his cheek, quick and light. "Take care of your machine. Take care of yourself." The operator watched her disappear into the morning crowds on Grand Avenue, carrying her ambitions toward a future he could imagine but not share. Then he returned to his elevator, running his hands over the brass controls that had become extensions of his own will. Rodriguez approached, still learning the hotel's rhythms. "Quiet morning?" "They usually are," the operator replied. "The real drama happens at night." "Any advice for surviving here?"
The operator considered the question, thinking of Pemberton's 20 years of service ending in disgrace, of Blackwood fighting his demons one sober day at a time, of Mrs. Sterling's sharp mercy, and Maggie's determined escape. "Learn the building," he said finally. "Not just the layout, but its personality. Every floor has its own character, every guest their own story. Respect the machinery. It's more honest than people. And remember that everyone here is performing something, even if it's just competence." Rodriguez nodded earnestly, not really understanding yet. He would, in time. Or he'd move on to something else, like most of the younger staff eventually did. The Biltmore Grand was either a way station or a final destination, rarely anything in between. A letter arrived that afternoon, delivered to his boarding house.
Pemberton's handwriting, careful and formal. "I wanted you to know that I understand now what you did and why. The sanitarium is not unpleasant. The work is honest, maintaining their elevator, ironically enough. It doesn't cry, thankfully. I'm teaching myself to live without schemes, to find meaning in simple tasks properly done. Perhaps that's its own kind of redemption. Thank you for engineering a softer landing than I deserved. HP." The operator folded the letter carefully, adding it to the small collection of important documents he kept, his naturalization papers, his mother's letters, a photograph of the hotel from his first day of work. Evidence of a life built carefully, honestly, one floor at a time. Christmas Eve in Los Angeles arrived without snow, as always, but the 70-degree warmth felt strange against the carols drifting from the hotel's ballroom.
December 24th, 1937. The operator marked it in his mind as he began what would be a long, quiet shift. Most of the guests had departed for family gatherings or fled to mountain resorts where manufactured snow provided the illusion of traditional winter. The Biltmore Grand wore its holiday decorations like an aging actress in costume, still grand but somehow melancholic. Garland wrapped the marble columns and a tremendous tree dominated the lobby, its ornaments reflecting the subdued lighting. The operator had helped install it 3 days prior, using the service elevator to transport the massive pine, its resin scent now permeating every corner of the building. He stood at his post, watching the nearly empty lobby. Rodriguez had the night off. Apparently, the new doorman had family in Los Angeles, people to share tamales and midnight mass with. The operator didn't begrudge him this. Everyone deserved their connections to home, whatever form they took. Mrs. Sterling descended at 11:30, as he'd known she would. She spent every Christmas Eve in the hotel, having outlived most of her family, and preferring solitude to the artificial cheer of distant relatives. "The 9th floor, please," she said, though they both knew she'd be back down within the hour, restless and unable to sleep. As they rose through the building, she spoke without looking at him. "I've been thinking about our doorman, the former one. How easy it was for him to convince people they were hearing ghosts. We want to believe in mysteries, don't we? It makes life feel less mechanical." "Perhaps," he replied, "but mechanical things have their own mysteries. How parts work together, how friction and balance create motion." She smiled slightly. "Spoken like a true engineer. Though I notice you said create motion, not create meaning." The distinction hung between them as they reached her floor. After she departed, he descended alone, the car feeling heavier somehow without passengers to justify its movement. This was the paradox of his work. He was most necessary when least noticed, most successful when his presence became invisible. At 1 in the morning,
he performed his maintenance ritual, oiling the guide rails with the devotion of a priest tending altar candles. The mechanism responded with its familiar whisper of appreciation. No crying now, no mysterious stops. The elevator had returned to its pure function, unencumbered by human drama. The telephone rang at the night desk, unusual for this hour on Christmas Eve. The relief operator answered, then called out, "It's for you. Says her name is Maggie." He took the receiver, hearing the static that suggested a long-distance connection. "I'm in San Francisco," her voice came through, tinny but warm. "Visiting family. But I wanted, I don't know." "To say Merry Christmas, I suppose. How's the radio work?" "Harder than I expected. Better than I dreamed." A pause, filled with electric crackling. "I told our story on the air last week. Changed everything, like you said. Made it fiction. Set it in New York in a department store. The crying elevator became a singing one, a ghost that hummed lullabies." "How did it end?" "The operator figured out it was a music box hidden in the shaft, left there by a lonely child who worked in the store during the last century. He returned it to the child's grave." She laughed softly. "My producer said it was too sentimental, but the listeners loved it. Sometimes people need sentiment more than truth." After they said goodbye, he stood holding the silent receiver, thinking about the stories we tell ourselves and others, how they shape reality as surely as any mechanical force. Mr. Blackwood appeared at 2, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute the hotel usually served at night. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering 1 cup. His hands were steady now, 3 weeks of sobriety having restored some equilibrium. They stood together in the empty lobby, sipping coffee that tasted of better times. "The owners are pleased," Blackwood said eventually. "The inspector's report, the resolution of the incidents. They're keeping the manual elevators after all. Say it adds character, makes us distinct from those modern hotels with their automatic boxes. That's good news." "Is it?" Blackwood studied him. "You could operate an automatic elevator with your eyes closed. This manual operation, it's becoming antiquated. You're preserving a dying skill." The operator thought about this, about skills that became obsolete, about men whose functions were replaced by progress. Someone needs to preserve it. Otherwise, who will remember how things used to work? Romantic notion for a realist. Maybe realism includes accepting what we choose to maintain. Blackwood raised his coffee cup in a small toast. To maintenance, then, of machines and traditions and ourselves. Dawn approached gradually, painting the eastern sky pink and gold through the tall windows. The operator had always loved this moment, when night shifted to day like a massive gear engaging. The city awakened in layers, first the delivery trucks, then the streetcars, then the waves of workers beginning their daily migrations. A figure appeared in the lobby entrance, Dorothy Parker, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. She approached the elevator, smiling. "I wanted to give you this," she said, handing him the package. "A thank you of sorts." Inside was a photograph, the same one he'd found in the newspaper archive, showing her as a child with the doll at the charity gala. But this was the original, clearer and more detailed. On the back she'd written, "The past is only a burden if we carry it alone. Thank you for helping me set mine down. D.P. Christmas, 1937. My daughter loves the doll," she added. "She's named it Hope."
Children have a way of transforming things, don't they? Making them new again. After she left, he tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket, next to his mother's latest letter. She was well enough to travel, would visit in the spring. The mathematics of his life had balanced finally. Not wealthy, never that, but sufficient. Stable. The day operator arrived at 7, cheerful and loud, ready to ferry the Christmas morning guests to their celebrations. The operator handed over the controls, that daily ritual of transfer, and prepared to leave. But he paused in the lobby, looking back at his machine, this vertical conveyance that had become the center of his world.
The brass gleamed in the morning light, and the car sat ready, patient, honest in its purpose. No more crying echoed in its shaft. No more deceptions played out between its floors. It had returned to what it was meant to be, a simple, elegant solution to the problem of vertical distance. Walking out into the Los Angeles morning, he thought about Pemberton in his sanitarium, learning to live without schemes, about Maggie in San Francisco, transforming reality into radio waves, about Mrs. Sterling in her tower, sharp and kind in equal measure, about Blackwood fighting his demons one day at a time. They were all, in their ways, operators of their own machines, managing the ascents and descents of their lives. The city stretched before him, already warm, smelling of orange blossoms and automotive exhaust, dreams and disappointments in equal measure. Somewhere, other elevators were carrying other people between floors, each journey a small story of aspiration or defeat. But his elevator, the one he'd tended for 6 years, ran quiet and true. He walked toward his boarding house, thinking about the spring, about his mother's visit, about the steady work that awaited him that night and all the nights to come. The mathematics of existence had no final sum, only continuous calculation. But sometimes, on a Christmas morning in Los Angeles, with photograph in pocket and purpose in hand, the equation balanced perfectly. The Biltmore Grand stood behind him, Art Deco crown catching the light, and somewhere in its heart an elevator waited in patient silence, ready to lift and lower, to serve its simple, essential function. No ghosts, no crying, just the honest mechanics of vertical travel, beautiful in its pure utility. The operator smiled, walking into his day off, carrying nothing but the satisfaction of work well done and mysteries properly solved. In a city built on illusions, he had found something real, the quiet dignity of understanding how things actually work, and the grace to let them work properly. Behind him, the hotel breathed its constant breath, and the elevator cables sang their steel song, and life continued its ancient pattern of rising and falling, each movement measured, necessary, and sufficient.